This is the London FinTech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is London FinTech Podcast, episode 137, brought to you in association with Smart Pension, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Marek Zwiefka-Sibley to discuss the racy topic of digital humans or avatars. If one of the burdens of the new podcaster is the trouble that they have finding anyone to be on the show whatsoever, then at the other end of the line, your problem is having far too many contacting you to be on the show. You can spend days searching through them. Most of these I filter out as the inquiries are for other countries, from folks who didn't spot the word London, or they're on tech topics rather than UFS topics, didn't research the show. However, sometimes when it seems cool enough, I do the odd excursion into these worlds, and today is one such. Maybe you, like me, saw on YouTube some time back the artificial Japanese newsreader. Maybe, like me, you used notjordanpeterson.com before it closed down recently. I won't say who, but that resulted in me spoofing two people. The first lines of their emails were, "What? I didn't know you knew Jordan Peterson." For those of you who missed out on this website when it was working, you typed in text and it gave an audio of, say, 90% plus likeness of the real Jordan Peterson reading this out. Good deep fake stuff, and amazing that it was constructed almost entirely off the shelf. For some reason, Siri failed to progress very much as far as I can see, but I regularly ask my Android phone for stuff, and it generally replies with the right answer. We're finally in the world of Star Trek, where you can talk to your computer and it'll talk back. But can we ever get to the world of Red Dwarf, where you're chatting to Holly, please don't mention Hilly, and it's a similar experience to Skyping a real person? Well, as far as I was aware, that was that. But however, it turns out, in circumstances that we shall get on to, that actually not only is this work going on around the world, which I imagined, but it's going on closer to home. Marek and his chums at Trulience.com, that's Trulience.com, are leading the way in creating simply programmable digital humans, virtual beings you can interact with in a browser, on your computer, or on your phone. As this is a video thing, you've really got to check out the links to the YouTubes in the show notes to give you a feel. Anyway, it's a no-brainer that we might one day wish to interact visually with computers, and clearly there are zillion potential commercial applications of this. As Marek will explain later, it's not just the equivalent of text-to-speech, where you've got text-to-speech and face moves and smiles and all that kind of stuff, but actually they can also use the computers to track what you're doing, so it interacts. And I'm sitting here with a sort of rather pretty lady blinking at me on my left and putting me off entirely, who, wherever I move around the room, follows me with her eyes. So I'm obviously doing well there, and I shall have a good conversation with her later. So let's look behind the curtain at how all this magic is created. Plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Hi, Marek. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for coming.
So, Marek, normally I try and find something interesting to chat to people at the start of the show to make up for hearing, I don't know, about pensions or something like that for the rest of it, so at least there's some interesting content. But in your case, the content itself is so interesting that maybe we should just dive straight into it without further ado. So before we get on to your digital friend who keeps smiling and winking at me in the corner of my eye, which I don't find the slightest bit distracting, he says, sort of getting red under the collar, how did you sort of get to here from wherever it was you started in the first place on this old sort of career journey thing?
Okay, so Trulience was sort of formally incorporated in January of this year.
And just for the listeners, because I didn't work this one out, I'm obviously not as clever as you chaps, clearly. Trulience, which looks to me like a little bit of a random sequence of letters, is not actually a random sequence of letters, you tell me.
No, it stands for True Likeness Science, and the .com was available.
Well, TrueLikeNessScience.com wasn't available, or was that too many letters?
That was a little bit too long, so we ended up plumping for Trulience.
Oh, I see. I've gone with LondonFinTechPodcast.com, and back in the day I had the DAOofBizDev.com, but yes, that's probably why I'm a commercial failure, because my websites are too long. Let's rewind a bit. Why did you suddenly decide to form a company called Trulience and incorporate it in January?
Okay, so I incorporated it with my co-founder Ben Weeks, who I met actually back in 2000 on holiday. I'd just stopped working in the city, where I'd been since leaving university. I'd spent 3 years there in total, 1 year as a shipbroker and 2 years as a derivatives trader. But I knew from a very young age that I wanted to work for myself. So after that 3 years of experience, I decided to leave, went on holiday, met Ben, who was still working in the city, We kept in touch for the next couple of years, talking about various sort of entrepreneurial ideas. And in 2003, we set up our first software company that was based in London with most of our staff abroad, India predominantly, developing SMS, text messaging services.
And that company was called?
And that was Requestec.
And it did what?
Well, at the time, Ben was working on sending out trade alerts to traders, letting them know when certain prices moved in certain directions. And we figured that we could use that same sort of technology for other alerts. So our first contract was with a company called At the Races, who had the media rights to horse racing in the UK and I think abroad as well. So we started sending out text messages on their behalf to their punters with horse racing results. And that company developed lots of SMS-based services. We were running that until sort of the late noughties, 2010-11, by which point we had moved or pivoted to mobile 3G video. So these were in the very early days where 3 came onto the scene.
That's some pivot from sort of ASCII letters to visual stuff.
Yeah, well, text messaging technology is quite simple. You just send an HTTP request to a gateway and, without too much complication in between, you can send a message to anybody's phone. But because it's simple, they're after a number of years, started to become
commodity.
Yeah, exactly. So what you could make from sending out a message went down, the number of competitors went up, so we figured we had to do something more complicated in order to remain in business, really.
And the next obvious step from a text message was a visual. That's some leap. That's some pivot.
It was all based around mobile communications, so we felt that we had some know-how in that area. But yeah, you're right. It was quite a pivot, and we had to hire new staff, retrain a lot of the staff that had been working with us purely on very simple text messaging before that, but quickly realised that 3G circuit switched video calling was never going to really cut it.
So just pressing pause on that one, going from your sort of world that you understand all this to my sort of dumb world, somebody like me would have used, for the sake of argument, Skype video calling 15 years plus ago or something like that. I don't actually know off the top of my head when I first used it on the phone. I didn't really use it on the phone very much. I just sort of find it a bit sort of inconvenient and all that kind of stuff. But I'm guessing that 10 years ago or something, I maybe could do Skype on my phone?
About that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So going back to 3G packet switching, mumble, then how did Skype do its video calling when it was only 3G? Because 4G is only coming recently. And 5G, we're going to be able to sort of fry an egg on the pavement, is coming.
Well, Skype was and is a closed shop. So the way they did it wasn't public knowledge. We couldn't tap into those libraries and tools.
So they had some clever wizardry, basically.
Yeah.
Really ahead of its time wizardry, by the sound of it.
Yes, yeah, they did really. But at the same time, and very luckily for us, Google came onto the scene with WebRTC, RTC standing for real-time communications, and they open sourced that. So all of a sudden we had another way of connecting to mobile phones originally in a video call. And then we thought, well, seeing as this WebRTC technology works online, we'll be able to, equally connect people in calls with web browsers as we do in calls on mobile phones. So we ended up developing a communications platform based purely around WebRTC, and in 2011 span out another company called SayPage, which, because of our past as Requestec, sort of became known in the industry, if you like, as Requestec SayPage. And in 2014, we were acquired by Blackboard, a company based in Washington, D.C. in the States, which was, and I think still is, the biggest online educational firm in the world, who wanted to upgrade their video communication platform that they were using to essentially connect teachers and students. So, as I say, we were bought in 2014, and then as part of the deal we had to stay on for another 2 years working with them.
So you tell it very well, and I mean, from that explanation, it seems to be that it's almost a logical progression. So you've got all this web communication stuff sorted and mobile communication stuff and all that kind of thing, and as you say, I think one of the USPs of you guys, we'll talk about whether there's a market at all at the moment or whether it's still very nascent, is that you can do it on people's phones and you can do it on a browser, and you don't have to download a bunch of softwares and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Whenever somebody says to me, a conference call and download this, it never bloody works. It hasn't ever worked. So not downloading software is really very good. So, and then plus, you had this sort of crazy sort of hyperspace button going back to asteroids, where one day you're doing text and then you decide to do sort of video conferencing. And then presumably you press your sort of virtual hyperspace button and go, oh, right, okay, well, rather than connecting two people, why don't we connect one person and a virtual person or something like that?
Well, exactly, yeah.
It would have seemed logical in your mind. I must say, I would have to live many lifetimes to actually sort of imagine that kind of leap. But it's a good job that some people do it.
It sort of stemmed from the fact that we encountered lots of obstacles in terms of getting real experts on one end of a video call who were willing to do it. So we were talking to doctors, to teachers, where we thought we could create compelling services around video calling, and found that not only was it difficult, especially in this country. I think in America it seemed to be a bit easier in the later sort of stages when we came under the attention of Blackboard. But in this country at least, we definitely felt that there was a challenge in not only getting people willing to do it, but willing to be up all hours of the day when the user, the patient or the student, wanted to interact with that particular service. So I think it's only from that real problem that we had that we then thought, well, wouldn't it be good if we could replace that real human with a digital human that has got a wealth of artificial intelligence built in, is available 24/7, and that's when in 2016 I had a fortuitous meeting with Will Wynn, who's also done one of your podcasts.
Yes, this was the amazing thing that I was trailing in the introduction, that all this sort of hot, sexy stuff, I should re-emphasise in a second why you're hot and sexy, not you personally, of course, your lady is slightly hot and slightly sexy, but the technology is even more hot and more sexy, was that this literally came out of me trolling Will on LinkedIn, in that one day he said, I'm chairman of some name I couldn't pronounce, Trulience. I don't really use LinkedIn much because I get so much spam, but so I just sort of, in my usual sort of kind and considerate way, replied saying clearly he's not very busy in the day job, which of course is highly ironic because he's chairman of Arena Flowers and full-time at Smart Pension, which is growing sort of massively, as well as I think he's at Octopus Accelerator, completely crazy. He must drink lots of coffees. Anyway, so that was that. It sort of went by. Then I had lunch with him last week and happened to sort of be teasing him on the same topic. And then he explained what it was. And I said, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. Why didn't you tell me that before? And of course, the last place that I would look for something sort of hot and sexy is a pensions provider, but clearly Smart Pension are a hot and sexy pensions provider because you're part of them.
Yeah, that's
I can
right.
buy a pension off this lady on my left.
So whilst Ben was tinkering away with these ideas, having left Blackboard, I was going to say in his bedroom, but almost, in his house, I had a lunch with Will, and Will was talking to me, amongst other things, about one of the issues that financial firms have, especially in the saving space, and that's inspiring young people to save for their pensions. And he was talking about how they had literally just, I think that week, released their first Alexa service where people can speak to Amazon Alexa to find out how their pension's doing, to increase their contributions and such like. He was saying, wouldn't this be great if we could actually put some sort of video element on top? So rather than it just being a voice-only service, you could see somebody talking to you and answering your questions, but as well as that, you could see graphs of how your pension might be performing, or some other visual value adds that would, go over and above what they were already doing. So I then mentioned that, this is exactly up Ben's street, and got them to have a conversation. I think just a week or two later, Ben had a seat at the Smart Pension offices, and I think a few months after that, I was brought on board. And then Smart Pension span out Trulience and are now a major shareholder in Trulience, together with Ben and myself and a few others.
So to me, that shows the importance of something that was very important 20, 30 years ago, and then became completely unimportant. It became a sort of a sign of not really being committed to your company. But from this story is super important, because basically our conversation today relies on two lunches and conversations with lunches. Uh-huh. So, there is a view in many of these sort of factory-type mega-cos, which is that lunch is for wimps and all that kind of stuff. But vice versa, especially in this sort of entrepreneurial world, if you hang out with interesting people and have lunch with interesting people, they've always got something interesting going on, and that can create opportunities that you might never find in a linear fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true.
Sitting behind your computer, it's so easy to just hide behind the computer.
Yeah. As
I know for the last 2 years. Right, okay, so that's all that, which is an amazing story in itself, and I think there's a lesson in that, as I say, have more lunches with people. Don't spend all your life at the computer. So I don't know whether I emphasised it enough, but I mentioned the deep fake at the beginning, and these deep fakes are getting better and better, and I didn't see something, but I saw it in the corner of my eye. Some YouTube things are hitting are very fashionable these days with deep fakes, where there's a movie scene where one actor mutates into another actor over a thing, and it's really quite impressive. Now, as I understand, that's one category of this kind of technology, clearly, but that is a category where, in old-fashioned computer terms, that's sort of a batch batch thing run overnight because it takes so long to do it properly. What you're aiming at is not something where I give you sort of the introduction to the London FinTech podcast, you go away for sort of 6 months and you come up with a perfect likeness of me reading it out. But what you're into is being able to do that real time.
That's right.
And as I understand, there's some sort of programmability in there, and from what Will was sort of waffling on to me about, which is that, I can type in, this is a London FinTech podcast, smile massively or stick your tongue out or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it works, one with the left hand, one with the right hand. So you can just tell the avatar what to be saying.
That's right.
And you can add the emoticons to it.
Mm-hmm. That's using something called SSML, speech synthesis markup language, where, yes, you can interject normal speech with expressions, body movements, and things like that.
And SSML, is that a global
yeah, it's
protocol?
something that Google and Amazon, who we tend to interact with a lot in our day-to-day business, sort of understand and will act upon at their end. But what I should say is that whilst what we're doing is, I guess, fairly similar in terms of the end result to these deepfake things that have recently sort of gone viral in some cases, deepfakery isn't something that we are interested in, really. I think at the moment, there's a lot of mischief to be caused through that.
Yes, I always wonder whether a few of the Osama bin Laden videos were actually Osama bin Laden or sort of old-fashioned deepfakes.
Yeah, I think some serious harm can come from this.
Well, that's why not JordanPeterson.com shut down, because he said, well, hang on, I'm not very happy about this.
Yeah.
Evidence in court and, Jordan Peterson saying Trudeau should be hung from the rafters. I mean, how do you ever prove? I mean, the trouble with that, well, let's just talk about that one, actually, because it is quite important. And for many people, that will be their only experience of this kind of phenomenon. And you're obviously doing it sort of responsibly in a business context and not trying to fake anybody. But in that context, the cat is out of the bag. Once you can simulate using some available tools, if you're clever enough, and a few hours of speech, anybody's voice, or potentially what anybody looks like, then going back to evidence in court or people's reputation or whatever, I mean, I can't see how that can be put back in the box.
Well, luckily, there are companies out there who are working very hard to detect this type of stuff.
But it's an arms race, though, isn't it? Yeah. They'll be able to detect this one, so then the other people will go further and further and further.
Yeah, so the hope is that they'll always be one step ahead. And I think the social media networks are under a lot of pressure these days to ensure that they act responsibly and that that they're not helping to further the aims of people that would create some serious harm through this technology. Right now, however, it's not very easy to simulate, I don't know, Donald Trump saying something that he didn't say.
Like, I'm going to nuke North Korea immediately, armies on DEFCON 1.
Yeah, that would lead to world panic.
And world war, which would also be unfortunate.
Yeah, so at the moment, the way that deepfaking works is that you choose a very small little piece of footage, and as you say, then spend weeks or maybe not weeks, but days honing a 30-second clip. At some point in the future, you'll be able to take Donald Trump, put him in any situation, and make it look as though he's saying something he didn't say.
Which is just the progress of CGI, in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, that's, I wouldn't say around the corner, but probably a few years away. But as I say, hopefully that kind of stuff will be detected and prevented from going viral. Now, the way that we do things is by getting a model or an actor into a studio, taking lots of high-definition photographs of them, and from that creating a 3D model of their face and the top half of their torso. We don't bother getting the whole body. It's a little bit too difficult, to be honest. And during that studio session, the model or actor will pull as many different expressions with their face as possible so that we can get all the wrinkling, all the lines and all the expressions that go into making somebody look realistic. And also we take a little bit of motion capture so that when they look, we get the acceleration right between looking left and right and returning to a neutral position. You can do that in a program manually, but it never looks quite as good as if you've got it through a motion capture suite, which you might have seen that they use in films.
The CGI.
Yeah. But that's the point at which we sort of divert from where a gaming company or a studio might then insert that avatar into a scene and then spend weeks or months or even years, perfecting it to do a certain thing. At that point, we have an avatar which we connect to an array of different services provided by the likes of Google and Amazon, as I've mentioned, but also, we use libraries on the client side, so in the web browser.
On my phone, you mean?
Or in
on my
your
computer,
phone, that can detect things like your eyes, your nose, your mouth, to work out what the person interacting with our service is doing with their face and their emotions.
So that's a very important point to emphasise, because going back to deep fake, you're pretending to be someone else. I'll ask you actually separately in a second. I mustn't forget this about the copyright of who this lady was and her image and all that kind of stuff. But deep fakes are, in a sense, just a form of CGI.
Yeah.
You're watching a film, it's not really real. And CGI has been going ever since George Lucas, if not before, but he was obviously Industrial Light and Magic was clearly one of the first super examples of it. You're not doing that. You're not, just as it were, outputting stuff.
Correct.
You're inputting and outputting. And that's what makes this young lady, who's clearly taken a shine to me, because she's still staring at me. I don't know whether it's sort of spooky or more real or whatever. It's not that real to have a floating head, but she looks like somebody's head. I mean, going back to Holly and Hilly in Red Dwarf, hopefully everybody's watched Red Dwarf and then they know what I mean. You can sort of interact with it. But the weird thing is that, yeah, I mean, I'm moving now and she's watching me. I think she definitely likes me, but yes. And also I should say, actually, that the version you're showing me here on the table is a hologram.
Yeah, where we've removed her neck on purpose to make her look a little bit more like Holly. She just looks like
she's got a sort of a black polo neck sweater, actually. I think that's quite cool on a lady like her. But it's not just on a flat screen, so there's a kind of hologram here, and it is following me around.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's using client-side libraries to detect your face. That's not that complicated.
How hard can it be?
But where things get more complicated, but as a result more interesting, is when you can actually talk to either the hologram or the avatar running in your browser or your mobile app, kiosk, we can maybe talk about later. Because there you need to be able to take the person's speech, convert it into text, then run whatever program you might want to run on that text so you know how to respond, and then you use something called neural text-to-speech, or NTTS, that converts the text output into speech output so that she can have a virtual conversation with you. And that all has to be done in the space of 200 to 300 milliseconds in order to maintain some semblance of reality. Otherwise, it'd be like one of those old satellite calls, and it wouldn't be very good. So we're very different to those CGI studios that don't have to worry about any of this real-time stuff.
But also, they don't have to worry about the interaction with another human being. And this is where it comes back to, the highest level. And I think science fiction is the forerunner of these things. This is where it comes back to, I see this as an example of human-machine interaction.
Yeah.
I suggested before that you might talk about history, but you said that only I'm that old and you're not that old and you're quite young, so most of history you weren't there. I was there, of course, for all of it from sort of centuries ago, but at the beginning, of course, computers were hardware, so someone would go and flick some switches, and then fast forward a little bit into the 70s anyway, you had punch cards, all the boys at school above me had punch cards. It moved on from that by the time I think. So you put in a punched card and then you have sort of a teletype and you could type in, and then it's fast forward a little bit, and then you've got your phone and you can speak to your phone, and you had IBM's synthesis was, which I tried in the 90s, it wasn't that good on my computer anyway. So now we're used to speech. But what's the ultimate, again going back to science fiction and Red Dwarf, the ultimate is chatting to your computer like Holly or Hilly. And it's almost, well, I was about to say almost, I'm sure it may be a long, long time ahead. I guess you could have a sort of a robot, but that's about as far as you can go. But once you're actually looking at somebody that's nodding, you're nodding at me and she's nodding at me as well. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, video is definitely the final piece in the jigsaw in terms of that machine-human interaction.
Well, I don't think it's entirely the final piece, actually, because sort of going off piece, one of the things that I did sort of ask Will about, but he said it's definitely not your domain, but I'm sure there's someone doing it in the world, which is new technologies are always used for gambling and pornography. And you mentioned gambling before in terms of the sort of text messages about which horse won the 10:30 at Lingfield or whatever. And, of course, I'm sure there's plenty of people working on sort of virtual, using the whole body, pornographic ladies and gentlemen and everything else that exists the other days, the other 98 genders. And then, actually, just on that one, it's very off piece, but perhaps more interesting in finance. I'm always seeing some crap clickbait stuff. I know they're clicking on it, sort of sex robots and all that kind of stuff, and data, going back to sci-fi. Mm-hmm. At some point, 10, 100, 1,000 years in the future, there will be human...
Oh, yeah.
Like robots who will interact with you in the usual fashion. I mean, come on the podcast and have a chat with them.
Yeah, there's a great book I've just finished reading by Ian McEwan called Machines Like Me. I mean, it's quite strange in that it's set in the 1980s, but a guy has an inheritance of £86,000 that he decides to spend on a virtual human being. And this is a robot that goes to live with him, and I won't tell you what happens, but I recommend reading the book. It's a very good book, and it talks about, perhaps, yes, you're right, the final piece in the jigsaw where it's an actual sentient being that goes to the shops with you.
Right, OK, so having done this sort of sci-fi thing, which is very rare on this show, I'm normally sort of feet on the ground, but things are galloping apace far faster than one imagined. A week ago, I didn't imagine that in Paddington there'd be some people producing lifelike real-time programmable avatars. So you mentioned quite a bit about your background and Ben's background over the last better part of 20 years in communications technologies and all that kind of stuff. So we won't actually pull the curtain aside on that one. It's not really a techie show anyway. But clearly you've got some sort of good sorcery that you do with your computers to make all this happen. And as you say, it ain't trivial because you've got 200 milliseconds for her to wink at me or follow me around the room. Otherwise, it looks really sort of very strange.
It's only because of our experience in WebRTC, really, that we're able to connect people so quickly to this thing that's running in Unreal, which is the engine that's behind Fortnite, the game. And without getting too techie, basically it's the same problem that we were trying to solve years ago with no download video telephony. Now we're trying to do it with no download digital human, because people aren't going to spend 2 or 3 minutes waiting for this digital human to download onto their computer or phone. You need to be able to connect to it instantly, and that's where we use WebRTC to connect to these avatars that are running in the cloud.
Yes. Well, I can't find any fault in that whatsoever. I'm quite happy to take it for real. I mean, the interesting thing, actually, going back to man-machine interface and going back to podcasters, massively prosperous and successful podcasters like me, of course, getting a million emails a day, is that, especially the tech ones, they'll say, oh, our tech does this and that. I mean, which a prime example is our tech is really good at measuring credit risk. And I think, yeah, okay, well, maybe. But, I'll come back in 10 years' time, you can show me your track record, speaking as an old-fashioned fund manager. The strange thing about this tech is it's looking at me. So there ain't no doubt about, does this thing do what it says on the tin, because it is doing what it says on the tin. Mm-hmm. Actually, just in passing, I was going to ask you this question. So you're not deep faking anything, but you say you have actors in the studio. So has this young lady sold you her image, or how does that work?
We only needed 2 hours of her time to take lots of photographs.
Does that look like her then?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Maybe I shouldn't have made the suggestion. When you're infinitely rich, she'll be saying she wants $1 billion for...
Oh, no, we arranged something with her so that if
the
future things were to take off, she would get some royalties for her image.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we should change her hair in the meantime. Okay, so time is marching on. We could talk about all this all day, but the main thing is just to give listeners a flavour for this stuff. And I say I'm just amazed at how rapidly the future gallops towards us. If not on, as the topic we're avoiding talking about before, Brexit, where the future is rather like a rugby ball, forever kicked forwards and not quite making sort of touch or the try line. So, on to sort of more mundane matters. You mentioned a few potential applications before. It would seem to me that what you guys have done in a very short period of time is phenomenal. And there will be other people out there doing it. And this is probably, to me, this seems like the antithesis, if I may say it. I probably don't lose any listeners on this, because actually these kind of listeners went elsewhere. But this may be the antithesis of blockchain, if I can be a little bit rude, insofar as people have been banging on to me about blockchain for years. I keep saying, oh, yeah, sure, I always want a new topic on the show. Anything that's cool, come to me when you've got a killer app kind of stuff, when you've got to have blockchain to, I don't know, grow fruit in the Sahara or whatever. So there's technology which is created, and, oh, yes, this is the technology, and apart from Bitcoin, of course, it's sort of, what's that sort of Pirandello one? 6 characters in search of an author or something? Anyway, tech in search of a use. In this one, it's rather sort of the other way around. I mean, I'm sure we could spend another half an hour sort of brainstorming potential applications for it. But in terms of just Trulience as a commercial company, where are you starting to focus out the million potential uses and many, many economic sectors that would use this? What are you guys focused on? I mean, who are you trying to sort of flog this stuff to at the moment?
Okay, so our first customer and partner, Smart Pension, have already shown it to their customers, and they've all expressed an interest in having their own versions of the Smart Pension avatar that they've called Saver. So there's obviously interest in the financial space. We're talking to healthcare companies, again, potentially triaging healthcare conversations using an avatar as opposed to a real person. And, in healthcare you can envisage scenarios where a doctor or this triage nurse may be able to show somebody at the same time as speaking to them, a picture of an x-ray that they may have had taken or their results, or they could schedule in an appointment to see a real doctor, and then you might want to show the calendar next to the person, next to the digital person. So you can incorporate lots of things alongside the digital avatar that's of use. We're talking to educational firms. Funnily enough, Blackboard have already expressed an interest in having a demo, relatively soon over the next couple of weeks, where there are obviously lots of potential uses. We're also talking to hardware companies that want to incorporate avatars into kiosk-type services. So the company we're speaking to at the moment has McDonald's as one of their customers. You might have seen, you can walk into a McDonald's and order. When you walk past on the pavement, you might glance in. They're talking about having an avatar take your order. In fact, Smart Pension is one of their apps, so they're having two things built for them at the moment. One is a member portal application where you can go in, speak to the avatar, update your contribution, see how your pension's been doing over the last couple of months or whatever. But they're also building a receptionist app. So when you come up to the door, there'll be a hologram that will spot your eyes when you're within a certain distance from her or him. It will ask you who you're to see. It will then send a Slack message off to that person telling them that there's a visitor waiting, and then that person will be collected at the door.
And presumably, going back to sticking all these sort of Google, Amazon modules together and all this kind of stuff, we wouldn't be that far off, certainly the deep state can do it now, we wouldn't be that far off the avatar going, oh, hi, Marek, yeah, take a seat.
Yeah, I think there'll be some issues with sort of GDPR in that you would have to have a photograph,
fantastic.
a photograph of everybody in your database to be able to make that connection.
But technologically speaking, you're quite right. But technologically speaking,
yeah,
automatic number plate recognition in garages and all that
definitely.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's all feasible.
So again, that just becomes more and more human-like when they sort of say, "Hey, Mike, nice to see you again," kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I see you've got a meeting with Marek, you need to take a seat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's all possible now.
Right, okay, so that all sounds very freaky and very weird.
Where I see it in the future is, I don't know if I've preempted something you might want to ask me, but where I see it, it is towards the sci-fi lines that you've touched upon, where, a driverless car will come to your door, the door will open, you'll get in, and on a screen at the front, there'll be a lifelike looking avatar asking you where you want to go. I see, scenarios like that playing out in the not too distant future. Personally, I don't think that driverless cars are necessarily going to be things that are going to hit the streets of London imminently, but there are some connected cities in China that are specially designed for driverless cars where you could have this sort of technology built in, and I do think that faces will add to the voice-only experience.
Indeed, and as I said, one can think of a million applications. I mean, I would have thought that with this kind of technology, the challenge is deciding on one or two beachheads. If you're going to invade Europe, you want to land at Normandy and somewhere else. You don't want to try and land in sort of Italy and Poland and Greece. So in terms of the future, well, we've talked about the sort of sci-fi and the distant future, which seems to be becoming ever nearer. I was listening to Styx Hexenhammer yesterday talking about BitChute, which is still a little bit clunky compared to YouTube. And he was pointing out that actually back in the day, and I think he was a very early adopter of YouTube in terms of content creation, I don't know, 2005 or whatever, 2000. YouTube was pretty poor and clunky and all that kind of stuff, and now it's really smooth as the technology is developed. As you say, you guys have set up in January, and I think it's one of the most phenomenal things I've ever seen. If you set up so recently and, this sort of nice lady smiling politely and paying attention to me.
I should say that we incorporated the company in January, but we had been sort of working on this technology for a good sort of year beforehand.
Oh, okay.
So it's not
you've been at it for 18 months. And I would have guessed this took far more than 18 months, but as you say, you know this sort of WebRTC and all this kind of funny stuff. But when I saw it online, and I say I do recommend the listeners check it out, there were sort of a couple of things I thought, actually, which is that firstly, I sort of started noticing how it wasn't a human being, and then I thought about that and thought, well, why is that? And then I realised that actually it was a strange kind of compliment, really, in that if you'd just given me a cartoon character which interacted with me and looked at me, I wouldn't have actually criticised it or thought critically about it, because it would have been a cartoon character, Teletubby, looking at me. I think, oh, it's a Teletubby looking at me, and that's that. But I think that it's because I mentioned before that notjordanpeterson.com, for example, total fag packet, but I think it's more than 90% accurate, and he thought it was very accurate as well. For the sake of argument, I don't know what I'd say, actually. The listeners can check out themselves. Well, it's definitely more than 80% accurate, and I'd say more than 90% accurate. I mean, it's so convincing as a human being. When I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, there's something strange about that person. And as I mentioned before, being rude, I thought she was a little bit sort of jittery, like a little bit sort of caffeinated. But you're so near 100%, relatively speaking, compared to zero, that how do you sort of plan out the progress? I mean, do you look at, who is this? Is this Saver or Truly?
This one's Truly.
Do you look at Truly, and have you got sort of a list on your sort of agile board about sort of, well, actually, I'd like her to sort of stop being so jittery, or a hair move, or whatever? Is there a sort of, do you have a sort of a road plan for your sort of favourite, I'd like her to do this and not that kind of stuff? I assume in 5 years' time, even a sort of super cynical, sceptical person like me would turn up and say, do you know what, Marek, I can't actually find anything to criticise, mate.
Well, hopefully, yeah, and hopefully sooner than 5 years.
Knowing you guys, it'd be 5 months.
I think we're at a stage where it's sort of commercially viable in terms of being able to turn up to somebody and say, look, we've got a digital human for you. sure, there are things that we would like to improve, and I think that jittery motion occasionally that's introduced by us trying to make her look real by moving has actually, due to the frames per second that we're able to send down a video call, which I don't want to go into too much detail of because it's going to be boring for your listeners, but that jitteriness is something that is a little bit difficult to get rid of, and so we'll be working on that behind the scenes, but hopefully whilst we're out selling it.
Let's take an example. Something like BMW has got loads of money, and you mentioned you use a big computer beforehand. You can see where I'm going with this one. So your current stuff uses your server and your big computer or whatever. But let's say BMW said, oh, this is fantastic. How can we improve it? So, well, actually, you can buy a big computer just like ours and stick it in the corner and it'll hum away.
Exactly. They can do that, yeah.
Exactly. If you've got enough dosh, you can have the hardware and then remove the bandwidth constraint on it.
Yes, yeah.
And the other thing I should add, which is really good, having sort of dared to criticise you, is that I think the lighting is phenomenal. How the light bounces off her forehead and cheek and the shadow from her nose. I mean, that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's called ray tracing. And NVIDIA, which develops GPUs, the graphical processing unit, is about to launch even more advanced GPUs than the current best on the market, which is called a RTX 2080 Ti.
I thought it was.
They're about to launch something, I think basically what I just said there was Super on the end of it, which will be even better than that. And also Unreal, the gaming engine that we build our avatar on, has just recently updated their platform, which we haven't yet gone to, which is supposed to improve the ray tracing even more. So there are things that are going to happen on the hardware front and on the software front that's out of our hands that's going to improve it. But on top of that, we want to be making our own little improvements and adjustments.
And before we move on to wrapping up and talking about you guys, what you're doing in the future and what you're after, one thing occurs to me about the avatars, and I noticed that online there are sort of two women, which sort of sums up the state of the world at the moment, and no bloke. And then you also have mentioned digital humans. Well, that's because you're all sort of very grown up and intelligent and all that kind of stuff. But there's probably a class of users like me who would rather interact with, I don't know, Thor from Stargate when I'm finding out my pension just because it's more fun,
yeah.
or Yoda or something like that. But as you're grown-ups, you're just doing digital humans. You're not sort of doing, I don't know, I want to find out from Thor.
No, we're sticking to humans. There's enough of a challenge for us.
I'd have thought that sort of the more cartoony end. I mean, the point being, it's also a commercial angle. I'm sure you'll find lots of people that want this kind of stuff. But let's take app-only banks. They're all getting really excited about. You can get a metal card on the plastic one. I mean, it's amazing the things that sort of catch on. I would have imagined that whether you guys do it or whether someone else does it, there's also a market for interacting on your phone with, I don't know, Thor or Yoda.
Yeah.
Oh, Avajon, are you?
The trouble with that is that, rather like I was saying earlier on, where SMS is quite an easy technology, and over a relatively short period of time it becomes commoditized, and you get more competition. I think had we gone down the cartoony route,
yeah, you'd have been caught up.
We would have been caught up quicker. I mean, Amazon themselves have got something called Sumerian, which utilises, without the WebRTC real-time interactivity, it utilises a lot of what we do also, but with cartoons.
I see. Because obviously Amazon are working on sort of the video version of Alexa and going back to school. I see.
So we like a challenge, but we also do it because we don't want to be caught up. It's a
consumer product rather than a professional product to interact with Yoda or a dog or something.
I think so, yeah.
Alexa.
One thing, Mike, I didn't mention earlier is that one of the main reasons when I say we, I mean Ben and myself, were interested in this technology in the very early days, before we started thinking about commercialising it at all, was that we thought that there was a potential for using digital humans in helping elderly people counteract loneliness. So that's one of the reasons we decided very early on that we were going to focus on lifelike looking avatars. So I can envisage a scenario in the not too distant future where you could have a screen at an old people's home or a monitor or even a hologram in someone's room that is just a presence, and we'll listen to stories repeatedly and we'll smile and we'll ask for more, and that's where, if you like, the genesis of the idea started.
Another example, going back, there's an infinite number of use cases for visual human-machine interaction. That's why this sort of what are the use cases is a silly one, because actually everything you can interact with a human or a computer with, you can do this kind of stuff with. Another example that's occurred to me is a therapist, and going back 40 years ago, I think it is, I went to the University of Birmingham Open Day, and they had a sort of teletype, which was the interaction with the computer then, and they had Eliza, which in modern language is one of the world's first chatbots. Actually from the 60s, I'm amazed to find, Wiki tells me, but actually in the words of the time was just a therapist, and it's phenomenally impressive 40 years ago. How are you feeling today, Mike? I've got a pain in the diodes on my left side, and it just asks you questions and all that kind of stuff. And I can certainly imagine there are categories of problems that people might feel more comfortable speaking to an avatar about than actually speaking to a real human being, because you're so bloody embarrassed that you've got this sort of problem.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we as a company won't get involved in building the actual services themselves, and our service has been designed for companies that have already got or could easily build Alexa-style voice-only services or chatbot services to plug into our avatars. So with Smart Pension being an early customer, we're getting very involved in how the actual service works, but we're hoping that as time goes on, companies will come to us saying, look, I've got this existing interactive service, I'd love to plug it into a digital human, and we'll make it as easy as possible for them.
Exactly, you give it the extra dimension.
Yeah.
They've got something, metaphorically speaking, 2D, and you can make it 3D for them. You sell the Z-axis. Well, the last question then was, this returns to the how on earth do you work out what a human being's doing in the first place, was I was in Monmouth Coffee this morning and noticing, sometimes I do, that women and men act very differently in conversations. Women tend to stare at each other. I think this is one reason that sort of women are, quotes, more intuitive. They just take more data from the other person. They see the micro movements of your face, and that's why they're allegedly better at judging character sometimes and all this kind of stuff, whereas blokes tend to look away far more. And there are some communities around the world in which if the man stares at a man, it's seen as a sort of threat and a challenge. So I was wondering, in terms of the different avatars, because you've got females and males, whether you are going to include a parameter for how much it follows your eyes. So it feels fairly natural if she's following my eyes. I think subconsciously, I mean, this is conscious in my mind, but other people who wouldn't be conscious, but subconsciously, if some bloke's staring at me, Christ, he's going to come and bash me over the head or something, just in terms of primal instinct from 10,000 years ago. So have you parameterised the sort of eye contact variable or whatever differently for the males or females?
To be honest, no. We haven't differentiated between the sexes or demographics in any way whatsoever, but we've built what we call it, maybe rather grandiosely, a virtual nervous system where we can respond to facial movements and what people are saying differently for different avatars. So you could, essentially have a situation where you have 3 or 4 similar-looking avatars, each with different personalities, and that's something we're looking to do at the moment. But we have read some papers about what goes into making a face look realistic, down to details such as the speed with which the eyelids open and close during a blink, and so that's all been programmed.
That's the other thing I was thinking was more like Thor. I think it's very hard to replicate eyelid movement for some reason. She just blinked much more slowly than you just blinked. Maybe she's getting bored with me by now. She's starting to look at you. Perhaps.
But what we've coded in are varying speeds of blinks. So you might have just seen one of her slower blinks, which I think I probably do occasionally as well, maybe when I'm getting tired. Yeah. So we randomise the speed of the eyelid opening and closing, or closing and opening. Yes. But we also look to incorporate the correct or the average number of blinks that people make per minute. So people often blink twice or 3 times together, but over the course of a minute, I think the average is about 15. So we look into doing sort of general things across the board to increase the lifelikeness of them, yeah.
And at that point, what started as science and technology ends up being an art. I mean, imagine in 10 years' time, it's an art. I mean, look at this. Oh, wow, that's so lifelike. You don't know why consciously. And maybe, for example, it's a bloke and he keeps looking bored or looking away or something. More than, a small percentage more than the women, or the women look sort of interested or whatever. Right, OK, so look, we've covered masses on the show. Everyone should rush out and buy one of these. Especially authors who sat at home and really lonely. We're talking about sort of the old people. I was thinking poor old authors sat talking to their computer and not getting anything back. Before we wrap up the show, I'd like to thank all the listeners out there. The future is coming very fast by the sound of it. Also like to thank my brand partner for the podcast, whose nice warm offices I'm in today, Smart Pensioner, who are fast, secure and free. Check out their UK workplace pensions at autoenrolment.co.uk. And talking of Will, I must chase him actually, because I noticed these days that you're smartpension.co.uk, which is a much more memorable website for Smart Pension than autoenrolment.co.uk. Anyway, moving on from that. So, for the thousands of listeners out there who want to buy one of these for Christmas, or perhaps want to use it for a commercial application, what would you like to tell the millions of people standing outside your window, desperate to hear your commercial? Shameless flag-waving pitches.
Well, I suppose the 2 things I'd like to say are that if you've got an existing Alexa or chatbot that you want to take to the next level, then contact us, because we can put a video persona on the front of it very easily, and not just the avatar itself, but lots of additional stuff like screens and graphics that you might consider, to bring your service more to life. That's the first thing. Secondly, if you've got a need or like the idea of perhaps reducing the amount of money you spend on real people with digital people, or at least freeing up real people to do more interesting things, then we can always create avatars that would work on reception, like I think I mentioned earlier on, and can take on a lot of that burden where real humans would get bored with the repetitiveness of something. Our avatars never get bored. And just to finish off, I should reiterate that it's not only on computers and mobile phones, but we can also look to incorporate it into any connected device, be it a kiosk or a touch screen or a holographic unit even. We're quite agnostic in terms of where our avatars are interacted with.
Excellent. Well, I think it's extremely impressive. As you honestly point out, you haven't developed this in 9 months, but you've taken 18 months. From my perspective, where I'm sitting here, that's a phenomenal achievement in 18 months. And in terms of stuff on the show, I mean, I get terribly excited about being able to do my FX 0.1% cheaper, or being able to get sort of 0.2% more from a peer-to-peer than a bank deposit. But I have to say that actually in over 5 years of doing the podcast, this is probably the coolest thing I've seen, and it's the most sort of sci-fi here, actually. So I think if you carry on in this direction, your challenge is really going to be to choose which sort of beachheads you want to do, rather than service these thousands of listeners who come back to you and they all want one and all want to use it. Because just from a very simple perspective, being a very simple person, there are all these ways in which we've interacted in the past. So video is the next frontier, and you're the sort of pioneer frontiersman. So I wish you every success in the future being a pioneer frontiersman. And if you'll leave us alone, I'll have a little chat with this lady here.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening. If you have consulting, advisory/non-exec or media needs in the FS or fintech space, get in touch with me at mike@londonfintechpodcast.com.
We could sit in a bender all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moon ride, watching a happy moon ride. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me, 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 watch the firelight dance.